to move the British Sign Language Bill be now read a second time. Today is a momentous day for many deaf people, a day they thought would never come. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the people who've been instrumental in getting the bill to this position. David Buxton, Chair of the British Deaf Association, who's led the BSL Act Now campaign, and Rob Geeney from the Royal National Institute for Deaf People. And some of the many, many supporters of the bill, such as Lillian Greenwood, Sir Mike Penning. There are so many people who have supported and are willing this bill through that I don't propose to use this valuable time by naming them all. You know who you are. I'm grateful for your help. My sincere thanks go to my honourable friend, the Minister for Disabled People, who has wholeheartedly embraced this campaign and even learnt to sign a bit of BSL too. So, I'd like to commend Deborah Lonnan from the Disability Unit of the Cabinet Office, who worked tirelessly. And to be very honest, she kept me sane as the fine details were being worked out, because I am not famed for my patience. I would also like to thank my office and Michael Rout in particular for the hard work in keeping it all going and making sure we got to today and we are actually going to move this forward. Finally, and probably most importantly, I'd like to thank the deaf community, and most of all, my brilliant parents, for everything they've given me in life: a family, a culture, and a language. Both my parents were profoundly deaf. My dad was born deaf, so were his two sisters. My mum went deaf when she was 4. BSL was a language that was created at least 230 years ago. Some say even longer than that. BSL is my first language. And I've got to tell you, as a child of deaf parents, hearing children of deaf parents grow up fast. They have to shoulder the responsibility well beyond their years. And that's not fair. We do it willingly. I never knew any different. But we have a chance to help with that, and that is not fair. Growing up, I saw firsthand the difficulties deaf people face every day. The huge challenges my parents had to overcome to be heard, to be listened to, more importantly, to be understood. Now, I'm told I booked my first family holiday when I was 4 years old. I don't remember, but I did. At the impact of BSL, I'm going to tell you a very quick story about my dad, who was he's a supremely intelligent human being. He was so quick, so fast. He didn't have vast books to read because his language wasn't great, but he was so intelligent, so insightful. He's absolutely my hero. So when I talked to him about getting a job when he was 16, leaving school, I asked him what he wanted to be. He said he wanted to be a joiner. But he went round looking for a job. He was a BSL user. He could read and write, wrote, but not to the way... I mean, I can say he was trying to pass O-level English right until he was about 70, but that language skill wasn't there. But he was supremely intelligent. He wanted to be a joiner. He went firm after firm, and this firm said, yes, we'll give you an apprenticeship as a joiner, but you'll have to be a labourer first. And my dad said to me, I knew they were lying. I knew they had no intention of giving me that job. So I laboured away. But it was in wartime. So, one day, the big jobs were all held up because a plastering job couldn't be done because there was no plasterers available. After a few days of all the jobs being held up, my dad said to me, they all came into work and the plastering was done. And it was done really well. but nobody knew who did it. The fairies had been. And they were all looking for, how did this get done? This is great. Who did it? And my dad said, I did it. And they looked at him and said, how? And when my dad's telling me, he said, they're daft. I just watched. They then said to him, you can have an apprenticeship tomorrow, but you'll be a plasterer, not a joiner. My dad became known as the best in the Northwest. And as I grew up on a Friday night, directors of different plastering firms, big firms, Unit, Pollux, the big names, they would sit in our living room round the table with me interpreting while my dad was going, more money, no, not doing that, add more money. He was seeing them all off and they would come and compete for him. But just think about that. Actually, in the scheme of things, they wouldn't have given him that job. He would have been written off. So it's really, really important that we don't undervalue deaf people because their ears don't work. It's only that their ears don't work. Mine don't either. Anyway, I also saw growing up that what a wonderful language sign language is, and how incredible the deaf community is. I often joke I was kidnapped at birth, not just by my parents, but by the whole wider deaf community in Liverpool. It's an understatement to say that deaf culture and values have shaped the person I am today. I wouldn't be here now or be the person I am without those influences. And today, this bill is my way of paying it forward. Because of the kindness and the care the wider deaf community have shown me, and especially today I'm talking about the life lessons they taught me. Sadly, I need to bring this bill to the House today because despite the incredible progress that's been made, so many of the unbelievable obstacles I saw my parents face throughout their lives are still a problem for deaf people today. People like my dad were campaigning for subtitles in the 70s, pressurising the BBC, pressurising TV companies to get subtitles. We've got them today, and Ofcom, if you're listening, the quality is atrocious. So, since introducing the bill, I've been repeatedly asked, wasn't BSL recognised in 2003? How is this different? Well, the 18th of March 2003 was the day BSL was recognised as a language, an essential and important step in this journey. But the intervening years where deaf people were forced to rely on inadequate provisions of the Disability Discrimination Act meant that for them, little progress had been made.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Absolutely.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and telling her story, a story which often isn't heard, and she's making a great speech. I was the Minister for Disabled People at the time when BSL was recognised as a language by a WMS. There was much debate then that it didn't even count as a language. And so I think that line in the sand was important. But I'm so pleased that she is now bringing forward legislation to take a further step. It has been too long coming to take a further step that will actually promote the use of the language, that will enable it to flourish in a way that other languages that have had recognition in statute have been seen to flourish thereafter. So congratulations to my honourable friend. I wish her all the very best in getting the legislation through, and the Minister too.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for those remarks. It is true that we've made progress. And I suppose if the deaf part of me is standing here thinking the deaf people are saying, very, very good, not waiting 19 years more, we need to make some rapid progress. So, in bringing forward this bill, I want to finally recognise BSL in statute, not just a gesture, but a law which requires positive action from the government, with real progress, putting deaf people on an equal footing with those of us who hear. For every deaf person like my parents who've been ignored, misunderstood, or even treated as unintelligent for simply relying on BSL, this recognition will be clear and will be a message that their language is equal and should be treated as equal. When I was preschool at home, we used to have lessons every day. Their reply, which was repeated right through my growing up, which was, you have to. Because we're deaf, they'll think you're daft. Only as an adult can I appreciate how much that said about how they, intelligent people, had been treated just because their ears didn't work. Throughout this campaign and from my own life experiences, I've seen the shocking inequality in access that deaf people have to public services. The reason I got involved in local politics is I was at school when my father wanted to complain to the local councillor, so guess who did the complaining? It was me. So that is across all aspects of life: healthcare, social care, education, jobs, benefits. That's just to name but a few. The RNID estimate that there are 151,000 people who use BSL and at least 87,000 are deaf. A huge number of people who rely on BSL, and yet we constantly let them down and fail to see the challenges they face. This bill requires the Secretary of State to produce guidance which will be issued across government about how they should be promoting, facilitating and protecting the use of BSL in their departments. I'm sure the Minister will set out in her speech how the government intends to ensure the guidance will really reflect the needs of the deaf community.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I want to commend her for bringing this piece of legislation forward to the House of Commons. It is very long overdue and builds on the work that my honourable friend mentioned earlier. But the fact is that there are 90,000 primary users of British Sign Language in the United Kingdom today, probably another 60,000 on top of that who use it as a means of communication as well. This is not a minority thing. This is a social justice measure for those people for whom this is the primary form of communication. I want to congratulate my honourable friend because, as I say, this is long overdue.
Can I thank my honourable friend and absolutely agree with him. This is long overdue, but we're dealing with it today, aren't we? Yeah. We're going to make progress, so God is good. I welcome very much the plans the Minister has to work directly with deaf BSL users on the creation of guidance. Using that guidance, we aim to right the wrongs that happen on a day-to-day basis. Much of this comes down to the need for interpreters. There's simply not enough interpreters in the workforce right now, and a clear lack of understanding and forward planning when an interpreter is needed. It's really not that hard.
Would she give way?
Oh, thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's making an incredibly powerful speech. And can I thank her for raising this and making all these important points. Can she accept that as well and agree that in Wales, actually we have a Welsh government that has put BSL at the centre of the new curriculum in Wales, putting that on a statutory footing to make sure that it is a language there and prominent.
Speaking, please face forward so that microphones can pick up and everybody can hear.
Thank you. I do indeed, and I'm sure that we'll encourage BSL to be used in schools. There are people who wish BSL to be, well, I think it is an O-level subject. I can tell you that when I was Lord Mayor of Liverpool, we actually, this is in 1992, so it's many eons ago, the deaf community relied on minicoms before mobile phones, and we got the children in Liverpool to learn to fingerspell the alphabet and be sponsored at the same time. And the money they raised in learning their secret language, which they loved, meant that all deaf people in Liverpool got a minicom, and any organisation that needed it. So yes, we're all going to be in this together, and we're going to make this work. It really should be obvious, and yet repeatedly that need for an interpreter is overlooked. It shocks people to know that the only place you are guaranteed a qualified interpreter is in the courts. And from that, I can say it seems that every deaf person has their own awful account of being failed. Such as the NHS failing to provide qualified interpreters for a medical appointment. It's unthinkable that we live in a world where a person can go to a pre-arranged medical appointment and the doctor has no way of clearly and understandably communicating a diagnosis or give medical advice. And what can be worse emotionally, and I've done this, is when a hearing family member, sometimes the child, is left to interpret medical information. How do we expect a non-medically trained family member to listen and translate complex medical information? I mean, throughout I don't think my parents ever went to anything important, not even my school days when I didn't do the interpreting. I always told the truth, but I often wondered if I'd ever been in trouble, would I have told the whole truth? I don't know. But it was not an issue, so we were okay. But, I mean, just before running up to my O-levels, my mum had a problem, and she potentially had breast cancer. Can you imagine what it's like for a 15... So my mum went into hospital for an operation, the biopsy. Can you imagine what it was like for me, between my morning and afternoon exams, trying to phone a hospital as a 15-year-old to get them to talk to me, not next of kin because it was my dad, but he couldn't do it, to find out if my mum was going to be okay. That pressure is unbelievable, and it's wrong. Yeah. I've even heard of heart-wrenching accounts of a son having to convey a terminal cancer diagnosis to his father, simply because nobody thought to book an interpreter. It's outrageous, unbelievable, but it's still happening. We need a much deeper understanding of the needs of deaf people and BSL users. I hear of deaf students complaining that interpreters and support workers aren't interpreting all the information that's being given. And when they complain, they're told that isn't important information. Proper interpretation matters.
Would the member give way, please? I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I too would like to commend you for bringing this important bill here today. Does my honourable friend agree that sign language is vital to the well-being of so many, as it allows them to take part in activities we know and love, such as celebrating Mass?
Thank you. Absolutely I do. I've often joined in those masses where signing is really good. And when my father died at his funeral, we had BSL. The priest was able to do BSL. We had the deaf choir. It was a very sad but a very joyous occasion, and one I'll never forget. And that was made all the better by those people in the audience, in the congregation, being able to communicate properly with the priest and with each other. Really, really important. So thank you. There are thousands of examples I could refer to across all aspects of life, which this bill aims to improve. If we can create this guidance with deaf people and not for deaf people, there will be such an increase in understanding of BSL. We'll become acclimatised to it, and we'll actually start to accommodate deaf people rather than just sidelining them, pushing them aside. Let that become the norm, that they count.
I'm extremely grateful to Honourable. I pay warm tribute to her excellent personal testimony, which is so powerful. Would she agree with me that now, for the first time, deaf jurors will be able to have the benefit of interpretive services as a result of legislation that I helped bring in? The crucial point she makes about interpretation has never been more important. I'm sure, my honourable friend, the Minister, will work very closely with her. Can I just make one final point, Mr. Deputy Speaker? We talk about the deaf community, and she's absolutely right. But let's not forget the thousands of people with learning difficulties who use BSL, including members of my family. And on her behalf, may I thank her. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I thank you too. It really is important. BSL is not just for the deaf community, it is for the hard of hearing, and frankly, it's for all of us, because we are going to actually let loose all the talent, the ability that's locked in deaf people because we ignore it. So I really am delighted that we are expanding the boundaries to make sure that interpretation is really available. So thank you so much. Most importantly, working with the Minister, these improvements will be in services that people are relying on. Deaf people looking for jobs, for employment, need equal access to advice and support at the job centre. You wouldn't go to a meeting with a benefits advisor and find that they can't communicate with you. So why should a deaf person? We've already seen how much of a difference a bill like this can make. Similar legislation passed in Scotland in 2015 has already made a huge difference to deaf people's lives. There has to be, I plea, a BSL interpreter for all government briefings. The deaf community should be able to watch those important updates in the same way as everybody else and have access to BSL. I've gone on at length, but in closing, I'd like to say how important it is that we seize the moment and capitalise on the interest the country at large has in BSL. I would have never guessed, I'd have still done it, but I would have never guessed that we would have made such incredible progress between introducing the bill last June and now 7 months later. Clearly, much of the awareness is due to Rose Ayling-Ellis in Strictly. She proved what my dad always says, deaf people can do anything, even the impossible, such as winning Strictly when you can't hear the music. That 10-second glimpse she gave into the hearing world, she gave the hearing world into deafness when the music stopped was truly momentous. People became aware and interested in BSL like never before. And I know we have much support across the House. So let me say, this bill isn't about politics. After more than 230 years, this bill is about doing the right thing. So, in closing, I'd like to say to the Minister, thank you for supporting this bill. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. And can I say what a privilege and an honour it was to be in the chair to listen to that very powerful speech. Sir Mike Penny.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, and what an honour and a privilege it is to follow my friend, honourable friend. We talked on the phone in the last couple of days, and I agree completely with everything she has said, and most importantly with what she said. And I know, like me, the honourable lady is a deeply religious lady. Mum and Dad will be so proud. They are looking down on her now, and they are chuffed. And I would be very chuffed if I was them as well. No one could understand the loss she has in losing her mum and dad. But what a project that she has left, they have left for us. I declare an interest. I am a patron of the Hertfordshire Advisory Council, or Hard of Hearing Council, sorry, and the massive work that they do in my own part of the world. And when I was a joint signatory to this bill, Mr Speaker, I thought back to when I was the Disabilities Minister, as the Honourable Lady alluded to when she was there, and I paid tribute to the Minister, because the right round letter that she sent out to us is everything I was trying to do when I was at that department, and I can only imagine the difficulties she has had with the right round, which means that we have to write to every department and they all put their thoughts and bits back in, and they all come back and say this is going to cost loads of money and this is going to do this and this is going to do that. The difficulty with getting it through DWP, and I understand where ministers will be concerned in DWP in particular, but actually to get to this position where I know she's going to support the bill, because we've all had letters from her, is a massive move forward for this House and for this country and for people that use BSL now and in the future. Because I think what this bill is going to do, and what was attempted in 2003, and I paid tribute to Our Lady when it was brought through, is to actually open the public's awareness to the needs of people, not just deaf, but people that have learning difficulties, as my honourable friend, my right honourable friend alluded to a moment ago, but actually to break out that capability, those skills, those frustrations of people that want to be heard in a language which is their first language. And for so many people around the country, they wouldn't understand that it was their first language. Someone said to me, "Why are you supporting the bill? Surely they call lip read." Well, that is naivety, but when I explained it to them, they were perfectly understanding. And of course, lip reading does play a part. Technology is playing a part and will continue to play a part in the different departments as we try and develop the government's approach and the country's approach to BSL. It's also massively important, I think, for the younger generation that get this much better, I think, than the older generation. The young children in Liverpool that my honourable friend was alluding to, they get this. The problem is there are complications between what sign language is being used sometimes in schools, and I'm not going to get into that debate today, but by this having the government's backing, the country's backing, this House is backing, across the floor of this House, and I'm sure when it goes to the other House it will get full support as well. It means that people have to adjust the way they think about people with who are deaf or with hearing difficulties. And there's a whole group of people out there, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Honourable Lady alluded to, where some people are born deaf, and they've had to adapt to that from birth, and some people have lost their hearing during the course, or partially during the course of their lifetime. And no one will be surprised that I'm going to allude now to our veterans. I'm lucky. My hearing is impaired because I didn't wear hearing protection when I was in the armed forces, because frankly no one did, because we was all macho and no one ever thought about it in those days. Quite rightly now we do address that. But there are tens of thousands, if not even more, of our veterans that are out there that have had their hearing affected, sometimes to a completely situation so they are legally deaf, where BSL isn't their first language to start with, but is going to and has become their first language going forward. I think the biggest thing that has made me so proud about this is where we've come in such a short space of time. A long space of time between 2003 and before that, till now, but between publishing, well, the bill's only just been published, but when we actually announced what the Honourable Friend was going to do to where we are now, I, like her, and like a few other people in this House, are quite shocked, because government grinds on and on. But actually, if you have a minister in the right spot, and you actually take it, I'm going to say this very vitally, out of certain departments and actually bring it forward, and they could not worry about their silos, and the minister could then be the champion of such a bill. And some colleagues have said to me, shouldn't this have been a government bill? Well, there's an argument for that. But actually, this is the best way. And the reason it's the best way is because people that really care are involved in this bill. We're not being whipped, we're not being told what to do, we're not given an advisory notes. The only advisory notes are the people out there that are the experts. And I say to the Minister as we go forward, when she has the advisory group around her and around the other ministers, the best people that know what's going on out there are people that use and need BSL. So it's not just all the big charities. I'm going to get told off by a charity when I disappear out there, but there are a myriad of different charities with huge amounts of expertise. And in my own constituency, I have great advocates for the deaf community in my patch, and they do fantastic work, and I'm sure they would very much like to be, and I will submit certain names. And if there was a spare place, and if the Minister wanted an old politician on there, then I'll be more than happy to assist as well, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady would. But I think we can go further, Mr. Sorry, I do apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. You sneaked it out my sight line. I do apologise. When I was the Disabilities Minister, I insisted on my departmental business cards had Braille on them. There is a huge proportion of our community that can't read because of their visual impairment. I was absolutely chuffed when I raised this with the Minister, absolutely chuffed, when I said to the Minister, this is what we should have, and quite rightly, there's the card, it was brought out. But that is not across government. And there was shock in the department when I asked for it in DW as the Disabilities Minister, and across government, the next time. I know there's absolutely nothing to do with this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, but if we really want to reach out with people with disabilities, that's another little step that will mean so much to so many people, and I commend this bill to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Lynn Brown. Very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm here this morning to support this bill, obviously, but I'm also here this morning to support my friend. We came into Parliament together in 2005, yep. and my friend has been very open and generous talking to us about her life and about her life experiences, sometimes funny, often sad, but I know that her mum and dad are going to be so massively proud, and God is indeed good. I know how personal this bill is to her, and I was surprised she managed to get through the entire speech without having us all in tears. But I'm really grateful to the Minister for enabling this bill to come with us today, and with such good wind. I'm not going to speak for long because I've seen the numbers of honourable members standing today, and I am always worried about just a little bit too much enthusiasm for a bill can cause it not to succeed. Having been a former whip, I have used those tricks in the past, but I'm sure that the whip's office today is going to be as good as gold. I think we in the UK must be very proud that our sign language has developed over hundreds of years in the way that it has, through constant use and refinement by the deaf community. And I think it is only right that the British Sign Language be legally recognised, and for its tens of thousands of regular users to be afforded the legal protections and the equal respect that they are absolutely due. I think it's really important for us all to remember that for many people across this country, English is their second language and used for writing or for lip reading, whilst British Sign Language is their first and primary language. So when public services and others don't recognise those facts and don't work together effectively to ensure that their communications and services are equally accessible to British Sign Language users, that is a major form of discrimination.
Will my honourable friend give way? I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she's making a powerful case in support of this excellent bill. I think our honourable friend, the member for West Lancashire, in introducing the bill, really gave a personal experience of how, as a very young child, she had to communicate with adults and the adult world on behalf of her parents. That is a social justice issue for her parents and people like them who have No other form of communication in British Sign Language isn't provided by public services. Isn't the fact that this bill recognises British Sign Language as an official language, doesn't that push this agenda forward to ensure that public services serve all the public?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I think the story about a child of a parent, because we are all children of our parents, having to tell the parent about a terminal diagnosis when they're obviously coming to terms with it, hearing it themselves for the first time, is just so devastating. And I genuinely don't think I would have been able to do it to my mum or to my dad, to sit and explain what a doctor had said and to tell them that their life was about to close. I just don't think I could have done it. And to think about that having to be an experience of those within the deaf community often, well, it's just, I mean, it's tragic, it's unfair, and it's discriminatory. Discrimination in all of its forms has got to be tackled, because it harms us all. When any of us are held back, I mean, what my honourable friend talked about during her speech most eloquently was the fact that there is so much talent within the deaf community that is simply not allowed to be unlocked.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'm enjoying listening to her speech. And I just wanted to reflect on that point that she made, because I was first made aware of this issue about British Sign Language and it not being an official language by one of my own constituents, Faraz Al-Mubaid. And he came to see me because he was really, really keen to impress upon me, as his local MP, the barriers that he is experiencing in getting work, in keeping work, and engaging as a full member of society. He's a very talented tailor. He's worked in the past for Harrods and for other high-end manufacturers of clothing. He has so much to offer, and yet daily he faces barriers. He faces barriers when dealing with local government. He faces barriers when dealing with the banks. He frequently finds himself in positions of great stress and anxiety because of the situations that he routinely finds himself in. But he has so much to offer, and I'm here today because I really want to support this bill. I'm so glad that the government are supporting it, on behalf of Faraz and so many other people like him who have so much to offer. I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Can I say the Honourable Lady is absolutely right, and she reminds me to name-check Lister Community School Trust. The pupils of the deaf community from that school spoke to me earlier this year and requested that I come to be here today to support the bill. So I'm glad that she's reminded me of to name check. And she's absolutely right. Frankly, if we are not allowing parts of our community to participate fully in the culture and the economy, the whole of our community, the whole of us are the lesser for it. So I'm really grateful that this bill is going to allow some very basic and practical steps to be taken to right this wrong. And I want to enable the bill to proceed today, so I'm going to sit down now and hope that my honourable friend's bill passes as quickly as possible.
Caroline Notes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and please be assured I'm going to take my lead from the Honourable Lady for West Ham. But first, I must pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for West Lancashire, who's done such incredible work getting the bill to this point. And also to my right honourable friend, the Minister. She may have been pleased to send the letter yesterday informing us all that the government was going to support the bill. That compares as nothing to the relief with which we all received it, and maybe means that we're making much jollier and more friendly contributions than might otherwise have been the case today. As Chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee through the course of 2020, I listened to a great deal of evidence from people with disabilities about their access to services during the course of the pandemic. I pay huge tribute to those people who came forward with their stories as BSL users of the challenges that they had had receiving information. We got testimony from the RNID, among others, who were talking about whole families who had not been able to understand the rules of lockdown and how they impacted them. And it is absolutely critical that moving forward we make sure that access to information, access to government information, is absolutely available for all of those with disabilities. But particularly on this occasion, I want to focus on those with a reliance on BSL as their first language. And it wasn't until a constituent of mine came to see me in 2019 to talk about an app he'd developed being used by Lloyds Bank, among others, that translated websites into BSL. And it suddenly dawned on me, and I learned, because BSL users weren't able, in many cases, to read written English to the same standard that we in this House might be able to. And he was absolutely brilliant at explaining to me that perhaps their access to medical information was restricted, their ability, as the Honourable Lady opposite explained, their ability to communicate with their children's schools, their ability to interact with all of those services, with the DWP itself, was limited because they couldn't read as well as they needed to be able to in order to understand. And I made the plea to my Right Honourable friend's predecessor that perhaps we could look at gov.uk and how we could make sure that the information, of which there is an enormous amount, many hundreds of thousands of pages of information, could have a similar system that you could have BSL overlaid on it so it was more accessible to BSL users. I don't intend to detain the House for very long today, but just to thank my Right Honourable friend the Minister, to thank all of those who supported the bill, all of those charities who've come forward to us with information, and to say, please let us not impede it any further. As we heard earlier, we have waited too long. Let's crack on now.
Yeah. Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As chair of the all-party group on deafness, it's a great privilege to speak in this debate and to support the British Sign Language Bill. It's been a long road to get to this point, and the success of this bill comes down to some, as already been said, some tireless campaigners. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for West Lancashire for the work that she's done to bring forward this bill, to win such wide cross-party support for it, and for her absolutely wonderful speech. Her contributions to the all-party parliamentary group have always been informed by her experience as a child of deaf adults, and she's made no secret of how she was captured by the deaf community, and you've heard that today. Her passion, her knowledge and her determination have underpinned the bill and the negotiations to secure government support for it. As the Right Honourable Member for Hemel Hempstead, and indeed my honourable friend for West Ham has said, she has done her parents proud, she's done the deaf community proud, and I'm sure many of my constituents who are members of NOP's Deaf Society will have been cheering her on. Like my honourable friend, I'd like to pay tribute to the British Deaf Association and in particular their chair, David Buxton. The BDA have been campaigning for years, decades even, in support of sign language legislation, and their work is not just a major reason why we're discussing this bill today, but why the Scottish Parliament have already legislated in favour of British Sign Languages, and similar proposals are at different stages in the Welsh Senate and Stormont. I'd also like to thank Rob Geeney and RNID for their support for the APPG and for this campaign. And of course it's supported by many other organisations and charities that support the deaf community and advocate for better communication, including Sign Health, the Royal Association for Deaf People, Black Deaf UK, the Institute of BSL, the National Deaf Children's Society Signature, and the National Register of Communication Professionals working with deaf and deafblind people.
Will she give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I want to add my wholehearted support to this bill and the efforts of my honourable friend. And like many members, I've had members of my own constituency, Stuart Parkinson, activist for the deaf community, my own constituency with Cardiff Deaf Centre, but also can I pay tribute to the work of the Association of BSL Teachers and Assessors, which I've been honoured to be a patron of for some time, and interpreters like Julie Doyle and Tony Evans. You'll see them on the Welsh Government broadcasts there live with the First Minister and the Health Minister interpreting in BSL in real time, in the room, crucially. And I want to pay tribute to them for all the work that they have done for the deaf community and for supporting this bill.
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution, and I'm sure many of us want to thank people who got us to this stage today. Throughout my time as chair of the all-party group, I've heard numerous and devastating examples of the barriers that we place in front of deaf BSL users. We've heard about the failure to think about accessibility in the design of public policy and public services, and the way that that limits the opportunities and life chances of BSL users. And that's why I'm pleased to support this bill, not just because it gives the deaf community and their language the status and the recognition that they deserve, although that's vitally important, but because the bill provides sensible mechanisms to help government departments and public service providers overcome the barriers they create. I'd like to give a couple of examples in relation to accessing healthcare. Firstly, the refusal to provide a video relay service to contact the NHS. VRS would have allowed BSL users to speak to health professionals remotely through a video call with a registered BSL interpreter. But rather than commissioning a national service, the NHS failed to make provision, leaving many BSL users without access to their GP during the pandemic, when remote appointments became the default. At best, deaf BSL users were reliant on charitable support provided by organisations such as Sign Health, but access to core NHS services shouldn't be left to charities. Those services should be provided as a right.
Hear, hear.
My hope is that the guidance required by Clause 3 of this bill, designed and informed by lived experience through the non-statutory board that's mentioned in the explanatory notes, will provide both NHS England and local health commissioners and providers with the obligation they need to provide such a service, as well as the support and information on how to make this work for deaf people. The guidance across the NHS can help empower deaf people to manage their own health and improve the way they manage their health. I also hope this guidance supports the delivery of specialist mental health services. Through the APPG, we know that too many commissioners think that providing interpretation for mainstream mental health services is sufficient. But this guidance can make commissioners aware of the evidence that shows that specialist services delivered by those who understand deaf culture and the impact that being cut off from the hearing world has, and that's best for outcomes. Now, there are countless examples of these barriers and the way that we fail the deaf community. I believe this guidance should help us remove the barriers that we create across society, but particularly in terms of health and education services and the support we provide to deaf BSL users through job centres. That's going to really make a difference to their life chances and to outcomes. But I also hope that the transparency and accountability created on accessible communications by Clause 2 can drive a huge increase in the volume of accessible information in BSL. That's another area where the deaf community are being let down. The high-profile failure to provide BSL interpretation at the initial COVID press conferences is just one example, but there are many others. Deaf BSL users are forced to navigate complex information in their second language. How many of us who speak a second language would want to use it to apply for a passport or try to check our entitlement to benefits or arrange childcare vouchers on a site like gov.uk? Why do we demand that nearly 90,000 of our citizens deal with these routine interactions with government based on the ability to use their second language? This needs to change, and information in BSL can empower deaf people to manage their own affairs and lead confident, independent lives.
Hear, hear.
I hope that the required BSL report set out in Clause 2 spurs on all government departments to meet the basic need to provide accessible information to the deaf communities, and ministers can certainly expect to be held account for their performance. Today will be a momentous day for the deaf community when this bill passes. It's a really important step forward in the equality and equity that deaf citizens should be entitled to expect from their government. And I know there are many people out there in Parliament Square right now following this debate and waiting for news. I know that members across the House are going to support this bill and give the deaf community both the recognition that they deserve, but also provide government with the tools provided by the BSL report and the guidance to improve the services we provide to them. I hope the Minister and her department will commit to a genuine process of co-production in the way that she works with that advisory board announced in the explanatory notes, empowering the deaf community to lead the change and create the society they deserve. As Craig Crowley, CEO of Action Deafness, commented this morning, the principle of nothing about us without us is the right one. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say this bill shouldn't just matter to the deaf community. We all benefit from creating a more inclusive and accessible society where everyone is able to fulfil their potential. I was reminded of this recently when I was visiting Mellors Primary School in my constituency, which since September has been home to Nottingham City's focused provision for deaf pupils. They've benefited from having deaf students and ensuring that BSL is an integral part of school life. It was a real pleasure to hear that the whole staff team are learning BSL, that hearing pupils are becoming fluent in BSL, and to see the school choir singing and signing together. That inclusion should be the norm. The World Federation of the Deaf tell us that legal recognition of sign language promotes understanding within society and, in turn, better promotion of human rights for the deaf community. Today is a really important step on a journey towards a better and more equal society.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I start by paying tribute to the member for West Lancashire for not only bringing forward this bill, but for presenting it in such a powerful, if not emotional, way. It certainly touched me when she was speaking. May I also pay tribute to the Minister, who I feel quite certain hasn't taken no for an answer in getting to this point, probably on multiple occasions. Those friends, those people who know me, are probably fed up at my antics at pretending to be a bit of a linguist. I try and speak English to the best of my abilities, but I do know a little Italian and Portuguese, and I hope soon I might be able to learn a bit more British Sign Language, and to a much better standard than I've obviously just demonstrated, for the benefit of my deaf constituents. I only wish that I had the ability and knowledge to give my entire speech today in British Sign Language. I know several former members of this House have disabled... several former members of this House have dabbled as contestants on Strictly Come Dancing, and I would have very much liked to stress this is not an invitation for producers to invite me on the show. The most recent series saw deaf actress, as we've heard already, Rose Ayling-Ellis, raise the winner's glitter ball. And if her dancing skills alone didn't inspire us to try harder, her awareness, raising the importance of access to British Sign Language, certainly did. On the 18th of March 2003, the then Labour government formally recognised British Sign Language as a language in its own right. It also promised to investigate conferring legal status on BSL. Nearly 19 years on, we're still waiting. The deaf community are still waiting. But as the saying goes, better late than never. This country has a proud history of leading in improving accessibility for those with disabilities, and it is so important that we create public policy mechanisms that will remove the countless barriers that society places in front of deaf British Sign Language users in their daily lives. As members of Parliament... Yes, of course.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for West Lancashire. I am proud to be part of the County of Lancashire and fully support what she's doing. Just on that point about daily lives, I know many of our constituents will have said, actually, the fundamental point of this is we all get on every day doing what we do very easily, but it's so difficult for them, and it's just making everyday life that bit easier.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And for those of us who do not have this particular disability or indeed several other disabilities, we take ordinary life for granted, don't we? Yeah. So as Members of Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker, on all sides of this House, we have a duty and a responsibility to transform the lives of our disabled constituents. That includes supporting and empowering the deaf community and improve communication between deaf and hearing people. Deaf people in the UK in 2022 still do not have access to the same public information and services that are easily available to the hearing population. They are forced to rely on disability discrimination legislation, Equality Act of 2010, to fight for access to vital information, for example, about COVID, healthcare, as we've heard, education and justice, as we've also heard, in their own language, an indigenous language of the United Kingdom. British Sign Language, and so I'm told, this has at times proven to be inadequate, and it is right that this government is supporting the Honourable Member for West Lancashire in writing this, by seeking to legally recognise British Sign Language as an official language within the United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, what is also important is listening to the lived experience of those who use sign language as their primary language. They are best placed to understand and take the decisions about their own needs. When decisions are taken without involving and properly consulting those who it affects, which in this case would be the deaf community, it leads to inappropriate and inadequate services, which, may I add, also leads to a waste of public money and taxpayers' cash. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know myself that it is incredibly frustrating when I cannot find accurate and up-to-date information, and I can't even begin to imagine how frustrating it must be for my deaf constituents to experience this routinely, with often the most basic but essential of information. I welcome this bill with open arms, and the duties it is placing on ministerial departments to help us break down barriers and revolutionise and improve people's lives. Thank you.
Ginger Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for West Lancashire, for using her opportunity to table a private member's bill for such an important subject as British Sign Language. And I was particularly touched by her speech and sharing her personal experiences, and her family must be incredibly proud, and quite rightly so. I'd also like to thank the Minister, who's worked so hard to make this bill a success. As a disabled children's champion, this is a subject that is close to my heart, and I'm delighted to support this bill. I'm not a natural linguist, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm a scientist, and when the people of Ynysmore elected me to represent them, I committed to learning Welsh. So I've seen firsthand how important it is to communicate through people. It's been incredibly challenging, but it's one of the most important things that I've committed to do. Last year, I met with the National Deaf Children's Society to discuss the challenges faced by deaf children, and in particular, the use of BSL. I've also had subsequent meetings with the charity, and I've also discussed the matter with many of my constituents. And one of my constituents, she's an incredible lady. She's a qualified teacher of the deaf, and she lives on Ynysmore, and she uses BSL, and told me about the 170 children on Ynysmore who are registered as deaf or hard of hearing, but they struggle to access appropriate education because of the lack of locally qualified teachers. In her annual report of 2016, the Children's Commissioner for Wales expressed concerns about access to BSL, learning opportunities for deaf children and their families, and the lack of support in mainstream education. And despite that, 5 years on, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no school for the deaf in Wales, and the nearest deaf education unit to Ynysmore is in Wrexham, some 90 miles away. And data shows us that barriers to equality of education have a detrimental impact on employment. They have a detrimental impact on well-being. There are, for example, a disproportionate number of deaf people in our prison population. So BSL is a unifying language for deaf people. And by making it a language of Great Britain in its own right, this bill allows us to take an important step to recognising the rights of deaf people right across education, to give them support and assistance that they need using their own language. And whilst under this bill the duty placed on government departments to report on their use of BSL does not extend to the Welsh Government, I hope that our colleagues in Cardiff will seek to introduce a similar duty. Like the British Deaf Association and the National Deaf Children's Society, I want to see the changes wrought by this bill level the playing field. The sense of community is one of the many fantastic things, Madam Deputy Speaker, about my Honest Mourne constituency, and I will do everything and anything I can to encourage that sense of belonging. I want the deaf children in my constituency of Honest Mourne right across Wales, across Scotland and England to have the full and equal access to education and employment and public services that they deserve. And in doing so, these young people can look forward to playing a greater role in their national and local communities. And most important of all, this bill can give them hope. It can give them hope for a better and more equal future. I'll end by saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is not about politics, it's about doing the right thing. And I'm proud that today this House is using its collective voice to change lives and work towards a more equal society.
Peter Alders.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Honourable Member for West Lancashire for bringing forward this bill and for her passionate and tireless campaign over a lifetime on behalf of the deaf community. I also thank my honourable friend and near neighbour, the Minister, for working collaboratively on the detail of the bill, which will secure legal status for British Sign Language as the primary language of the deaf community. This is a huge step forward and provides the opportunity to enhance the quality of life for deaf people by improving their inclusion and autonomy in British society, in education and with their career opportunities. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst this is a short bill, it will deliver a great deal for the deaf community. Equal and fair access to services, the opportunity to play a leading role in co-designing and co-producing those services, the assurance that both the public and private organisations must legally provide qualified and regulated interpreting services, access to video relay services calls that are of an equivalent standard to audio phone calls, the ability to access services remotely via intermediaries without having to overcome spurious data protection barriers, full and appropriate access to emergency announcements, increased legal protection from domestic violence and hate crime, protection from discriminatory employment practices, and finally, parity of access to mainstream television programmes at conventional viewing times. Vision On, I'm going back to my childhood, presented by the late Tony Hart, was a pioneer programme, but the deaf community should not have had to have waited 50 years for this particular level playing field. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to pay tribute to Anne and Daniel Gillings from Lowestoft, who are in Westminster today. They are passionate campaigners for the deaf community, particularly for deaf children, and I commend Daniel's school, Bungay High School, for setting up their deaf resource base. Anne and Daniel, along with the National Deaf Children's Society, have campaigned tirelessly for a GCSE in British Sign Language. In 2018, following a successful legal challenge, it looked as if they had made a significant breakthrough, in that the Department of Education undertook to start work on the design of the curriculum. I acknowledge that it is important to get this right, but nearly 4 years on, we're still waiting. It was Daniel's ambition to sit the BSL GCSE alongside his other GCSEs, but it now looks as if he will have left school by the time that is up and running. I would be most grateful if my honourable friend the Minister could liaise with her counterparts in the Department for Education to ensure that the BSL GCSE is introduced as quickly as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a great bill that will deliver so much for the deaf community. Time is short in this parliamentary session. Without procrastination, we need to get on with it and get it on the statute book as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Nicky Aiken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Once in a while, an individual pops up in this country and stops us in our tracks. Someone who really makes us think and often makes us rethink what is important in life. Someone like Captain Tom during the pandemic. Or, of course, Rose Ayling-Ellis and her time on Strictly Come Dancing, one of the most successful programmes on television. She is the most amazing role model for the deaf community and gave us an important insight into the barriers deaf people have to cross each and every day. Her use of BSL in a primetime TV programme has raised this issue into mainstream consciousness and shown us all that BSL should not be a marginalised language. In fact, British Sign Language is a beautiful, rich language. It has its own structure, its own grammar, its own slang. And hearing contributions from honourable and right honourable members across the House today has only reaffirmed to me the importance of understanding sign language and its value in society. And I pay tribute to the honourable member for West Lancashire for bringing this brilliant bill. Clearly, the significance of equality and accessibility with British Sign Language is both undeniable and unavoidable. This is exactly what I heard when I spoke to the National Deaf Children's Society. They outlined to me the challenges that many deaf children have had to deal with during the pandemic. In the run-up to this second reading, I heard from one constituent who said that if there ever was a time when access to information was important, it has been during the pandemic. In fact, one thing I learned from visiting the youth centre in my constituency, which is for young people with autism and learning difficulties, Caxton Youth Organisation, is that recognising visual communication will make even more people feel included. Indeed, I think it's important to note that it is not just the deaf community, as my right honourable friend, the member for Swindon South, said, who benefit, but also those with autism and learning difficulties. Many members may have noticed that I prefer to wear a see-through face mask as much as possible. And I do this to provide a message to the deaf community and those people who have to use lip reading to understand what I'm saying, what others are saying, that it's so important that it's inclusive. And I have had some criticism, Deputy Madam Speaker, from people on social media, it probably won't surprise you, who say, well, an awful mask. Well, I say to them, and anybody else who doesn't like my see-through mask, well, actually, I won't say what I would like to say. And I know from people who are in my constituency, such as Alexandra Morgan-Thomas, who was born deaf, why using my see-through mask is so important to her. Madam Deputy Speaker, today we have the opportunity to recognise this rich language, which is BSL, its history, culture, and principally ensure that British Sign Language users do feel completely included in our society. The bill has 4 points, main points, which I will welcome: to make BSL an official language in the UK, to establish a board to promote and facilitate the use of BSL, to state principles to guide the operations of bodies that provide public service, and to require bodies to promote and facilitate the use of BSL. I'm in no doubt that this government takes the principles of this bill seriously. And I thank the Minister, who I've had meetings with to discuss this bill, and also the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who I met recently to ask him to support BSL throughout the government, and he was very supportive. And I'm delighted to stand with this government, with the Honourable Member for West Lancashire, and charities working with deaf people, and the BSL users in the cities of London and Westminster to bring about much needed change. I back this bill, and as the Chamber will have heard in my recent business of the House, I am putting this commitment into action because, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is my New Year's resolution to learn British Sign Language, and I'm pleased to say that my first lesson, will start next week.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow my right honourable friend, the member for the cities of London and Westminster. I too would like to congratulate the honourable member for West Lancashire for all of her very, very hard work on this bill, and I praise her constructive and cross-party efforts, which I recognise well from my time on the Health and Social Care Select Committee with her. Now, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People estimate there are 12 million people with hearing loss in this country, and this is potentially set to rise to 14.2 million adults by 2035. And I think at this point it's worth acknowledging yet again the role that Rose Ayling-Ellis has done to represent that community during her time on Strictly Come Dancing, and I know she's supporting this bill, which is fantastic. In Wales, roughly 7,200 people use BSL as a primary form of communication, and as we've heard across the UK, this rises to perhaps 87,000. And it's important to be aware that the use of BSL goes beyond those with hearing loss to include others, including those with learning disabilities, something referenced by the Right Honourable Member for Swindon South. Especially given the likelihood of the number of BSL users increasing further, I am supportive of efforts to promote and protect BSL, including through its increased recognition as a language of Great Britain. Now, the pandemic has had a significant impact on the way in which we communicate, and we've adapted to a more virtual way of contact very often, and the widespread use of face masks, again something that's been highlighted in this chamber. They obscure our lip movements, and that can be difficult for all of us, in fact, in shops and elsewhere, but particularly, of course, for those with hearing loss, it's been very difficult. And actually, I think that fact has helped drive society to embrace BSL over the course of the pandemic. And so, admittedly with some pressure sometimes, most public health information has been available in alternative formats, including BSL, and I know the Cabinet Office is looking to extend similar BSL provisions for all public broadcasts, including non-COVID broadcasts from Downing Street. In this place, it's important that BSL translation is now available to those in the deaf community wishing to watch PMQs every week too. More widely, I'm encouraged by the work being undertaken by the Department for Education to promote BSL. As my honourable friend, the member for Waveney, has said, plans are underway to introduce a GCSE in BSL as soon as possible, and funding from the adult education budget is enabling adult learners aged 19 and over to undertake BSL qualifications. The government has also funded the development of a family sign language programme known as the iSign programme. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've made so much progress since BSL was first recognised by ministers on a non-statutory basis in 2003, and since the Equality Act 2010 and the Public Sector Equality Duty alongside it, they have brought with them an expectation of reasonable adjustment on the part of public sector organisations. Now, I have a degree of experience of that as a general practitioner, but I recognise it's far from acceptable on some occasions. Yes, family members can attend to help interpret, and that may be appropriate in some circumstances, but on other occasions I've experienced times when really the service hasn't quite been what it should be. And quite possibly the digital opportunities that have arisen from the pandemic will assist going forward in this respect. And I know that this bill will help towards those objectives. So, in addition to recognising BSL as a language of Great Britain in its own right, this bill will require the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to issue guidance to departments on the promotion and facilitation of BSL in the public sector. It will also place a duty on the Cabinet Office to report on the promotion of BSL in ministerial departments at least every 3 years. There's a strong preference for the full engagement of the devolved administrations to ensure the practical outcomes of the bill are enjoyed nationwide, and I hope the Minister will be able to reassure the House that this is the intention, if at all possible. And the intention is that the DWP will establish a non-statutory board, the British Sign Language Council, to promote and advise on use of the language. The board would have the remit to issue guidelines via the Secretary of State that public bodies should take account of.
One more thing, if
I will.
And does he agree with me that one of the great successes of the last few years has been helping to encourage people with disabilities into employment? And actually putting this through the DWP should be an extra driver to help people who are deaf also into employment in the future.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and funnily enough I was coming on just to acknowledge that in my final comments. These proposals are reasonable and would represent a further step towards full recognition and integration of BSL within our diverse society. They can lead to an increase in the number of interpreters and a reduction in the jobs gap with non-disabled people. The bill has the support of the British Deaf Association, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People, the Government and colleagues across this House. I'm delighted to add my voice to that support for this bill, which will help secure the role and status of BSL in communities across the country. Thank you.
Jane Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow my friend and colleague, the member for the Vale of Clwyd. I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to congratulate the member for West Lancashire. She is achieving something phenomenal, I think, here today. I'd also like to thank the Minister sat in her place. I suspect her laser-like focus and winning smile has contributed to getting this into the chamber today. I understand that 11 million people in the UK are deaf or hard of hearing, and we know that deaf people are more likely to have poor mental health, with up to 50% of deaf and hard of hearing suffering from poor mental health compared to 25% in the general population. And they're also, sadly, more likely to be unemployed, with 65% of working-age deaf people only being in employment. It is vital, then, that we do everything we can to ensure that neither deafness nor being hard of hearing is a barrier to participating in society, entering and remaining in employment and accessing services. This is particularly true for around 87,000 BSL users who are deaf and use BSL as their first primary language, who the Honourable Member for West Lancashire has highlighted often have to fight hard every day to feel heard and listened to. I am pleased that action has already been taken to help improve the experiences of deaf people and the hard of hearing, with the Government formally recognising British Sign Language as a language in its own right in 2003, and making provision for accessing services by users of BSL in equalities legislation and the public sector equality duty. Rightly, employers, service providers and public bodies must provide services in BSL when it is reasonable to do so, and I am pleased that the Government is leading by example, with public health information having been available in many alternative formats, including BSL, during the COVID-19 outbreak. BSL, more broadly, may also be offered in schools as part of the school curriculum. I understand that the Department for Education is working to introduce a GCSE in BSL as soon as possible, and I look forward to reading the Government's consultation on the draft subject content when it has been published. However, given the ongoing problems many deaf and hard of hearing people face, it is clear that more needs to be done. This bill is a great step in the right direction, as ensuring BSL has a legal status and that guidance is issued to all government departments on how they should accommodate the use of BSL in each of their responsibilities will not only improve the lives of users, but it will also help to bring awareness to the issues the community faces and help facilitate change across society. Therefore, I will be supporting it today. I also hope that this debate, the bill and the BSL Act Now campaign will encourage more people to take up BSL, much the same way that Rose Ellis's fantastic win on Strictly Come Dancing, which I watched every single week. As I understand, it led to a phenomenal rise in people searching for information about sign language and signing up for free training programmes. All that being said, I understand from one of my constituents that there is a national shortage of BSL interpreters, which often leads to difficulties for users who rely on them to access legal or medical services. As a result, I have been told that the deaf community has taken it upon themselves to set up community groups and act as interpreters for one another, and I understand there's one in the North West, perhaps called Signalise, I think. However, if this bill were to pass, there will be an even greater demand for interpreters, so I'd be grateful to hear from the Minister what plans the Government has to increase interpreter provision. As the member for West Lancashire said, let's let loose the talent of deaf people. I would also like to take this opportunity to talk about an issue faced by another of my constituents who has suffered substantial hearing loss as an adult, but who is not a BSL user and instead relies on lip reading and facial expressions. My constituent was recently in hospital as an inpatient and was understandably concerned that the skills and techniques they have developed to manage their hearing loss very frequently could not be used with people wearing face masks, approaching in groups, standing in difficult-to-see positions, and even asking questions in the dark in the middle of the night. This was incredibly distressing and frustrating. My constituent has pointed out that, had serious medical matters needed to be discussed, this could have substantially impacted their safety and recovery. I would therefore urge the Government to look more broadly at the issues faced by those who are not BSL users, but who face very similar communication issues. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say to the Minister regarding this bill, yes, please.
Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Lady, the member for West Lancashire, for bringing this bill here today. It's a remarkable thing to do with the Private Member's Bill to affect so many lives so positively. And I want to echo the comments of some of her honourable colleagues in saying, yes, I think her mum and dad will be incredibly proud of what she's doing. I'd also like to say to the Minister, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I've had the privilege of being on 2 of her bill committees, and to describe her as just being on top of her brief would be to do her a serious misjustice. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a linguist. We've had several of them in the chamber. They all seem to have disappeared just as I started speaking. The Honourable Member for Dudley North talked down his inestimable talents. The Honourable Member for Hindburn is, I think, the only Member of Parliament who speaks Catalan. I decided I wanted to do something different in Hansard when I first got here, and so far I've managed to include German, French, Japanese, Latin, Arabic, Farsi, Hebrew, Maori, Welsh, and this morning Icelandic in Hansard. So it's something I'm very passionate about, is communication. And that is what I really want to drill down into today, because this isn't just about fairness, although this bill has fairness at its very heart. It's about recognition as well. It's about how we recognise each other. It's about how we understand one another. And it's how we understand that some people communicate differently, but they're no less valuable to our conversation nationally. As my honourable friend... Oh, he's also gone. As the Right Honourable Member for South Swindon mentioned, this is also not just an issue affecting the hard of hearing community. My mum worked in a special school, and some of her greatest joy came from when she learnt Makaton, which is another form of sign language used to communicate with profoundly disabled children. And for some of those children, that was their only way of getting their message across. And to be heard, it's an awful way of phrasing it, but to be heard in that way is incredibly important. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to reflect on something that I've always... It's my own personal musing. I think the best way to sort of understand people, there are 2 of them as far as I'm concerned. One is food, and as you can tell by the increasingly structural nature of my suits, I've lent into that one quite severely. And the other one is language. It informs how people behave in the world. It informs how people view things. I was very lucky. I grew up abroad in Germany, so I grew up bilingual. I think in 2 languages. And it's definitely shaped the way that I view the world. And that must be the same. I'm assuming here, but I'm sure the Honourable Lady from West Lancashire can correct me if I'm wrong. It will give you a different perspective on the world. You simultaneously have to think things twice. You have to understand and reason things. And it does cause you to see other people's perspectives more clearly. So, in recognising that there are at least 90,000 people in this country who see the world differently and haven't been recognised by this Parliament, I think we're undoing a serious misjustice. We're also addressing the fact that as a community, we're not looking to our own heritage. British Sign Language, as we've heard, is over 200 years old. We have almost disregarded a part of that heritage, something that's quite phenomenal, especially when you consider some of the ignorant attitudes towards disability in the past, that we had this wonderful way of communication that's grown up naturally, that has its own grammar, its syntax, it's its own community within our community, and we haven't been addressing that. Now, obviously, as a member of a different minority community, I know how badly that hurts. And it really does hurt not to be recognised, not to be treated the same, just because of who you are and how you choose to live. So, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I won't belabour the point because I think there have been some far more eloquent speeches than one I've made today, but I am going to add another little language to my list, if I may please, by saying thank you and well done.
Stan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an absolute pleasure to follow my honourable friend from Hayward and Middleton. That was an absolutely joyous speech, and it was very, very eloquent. But no more so than your deeply moving speech. It completely touched me, the honourable friend from West Lancashire, and your comments. And I loved your stories of your hero dad, and also the courage of your mother and your support for your mother. That very, very moving. And my honourable friend also said that today is a momentous day, and it really is a momentous day, and I'm absolutely delighted to support my honourable friend, the member for West Lancashire's bill, that will have a transformational impact for over 150,000 deaf people in the UK who use British Sign Language. You should be incredibly proud for what you've brought here to the House today. And I agree with my honourable friend, we should seize the moment today and actually ensure this bill has safe passage. Now, I have been contacted by my constituents regarding this issue, and I know how important the passage of this bill is to my constituents, as it is to me too. By granting British Sign Language the same legal recognition and associated protections as the current 6 protected languages in the UK, this bill will ensure that deaf people will be afforded equal status with everyone. And that can only be a good thing, and that can only be the right thing. The creation of a British Sign Language Council is a vital component of the bill that will have a significant positive impact in promoting and protecting the use of British Sign Language. It is important that this council is inclusive and representative, which is why I welcome the bill's proposal that it should be comprised of a majority of deaf signers. It is imperative that any guidance must be created in direct consultation with the deaf community. Now, I have an example of many years ago. I used to do lots of voluntary work with a group called Birmingham Fab Camps, and we used to go to a variety of facilities, and Birmingham Fab Camps is physically handicapped and abled bodies, and it combines both together, and there's the most amazing one-week holidays. And I was actually shocked that at the end of the holiday they were actually asking me how we should better change the facilities for people with disabilities to actually best have their holidays. Well, they shouldn't be asking me, they should be actually asking the people who were in the wheelchairs with a disability, and which is why I think this part of the bill about the council and being inclusive and representative is just so important. Ask the questions to the right people who have the right answers of actually what they want and how we need to deliver it. Now, I think the key points in all of this is that the British Sign Language is the preferred language of over 87,000 deaf people in the UK, so which is why it's so important that it is the British Sign Language that is going forward. And if EastEnders and Strictly Come Dancing has actually proved, which others have actually mentioned, and the amazing Rose Ayling-Ellis, is that it is an expressive language. It's absolutely beautiful. We've all seen it every Saturday night, and my honourable friend for Loughborough, it seems every single night, and I suspect every single series since its conception as well. And long may that continue, it is. It's very distinctive, the grammar utilising the handshakes and the facial expressions, the gestures and body language to convey meaning. And I think to some extent it's more beautiful for how we actually speak ourselves. And I think that's what was demonstrated every Saturday when we watched beautiful Rose do her most amazing dance, and particularly when the music stopped. We didn't need music. It was just compelling, absolutely compelling. And of course, BSL was recognised as an official language by the UK government on the 18th of March 2003, but it just doesn't have legal status, unlike those accorded to other protected language status, which is bizarre to me. I don't know why it has actually taken this long, but of course I'm very grateful for the Minister for actually acknowledging that this will be going forward. Now, I welcome the Bill's requirement for the Secretary of State to issue guidance that ensures British Sign Language is accommodated in the responsibilities of government departments and public bodies. It is important that public bodies and government departments are accountable for the actions they are taking to promote the use of British Sign Language. That is why the Bill's inclusion of a requirement for ministers to report on their use and facilitation of British Sign Language is so important. This bill builds on the public sector equality duty and existing equalities legislation establishing a level playing field for the deaf community, and I am proud of the progress this country has made. Throughout the pandemic, public health information and Downing Street's press briefings have been made available in British Sign Language, and I am pleased that the Cabinet Office is currently working to extend similar provisions to all future broadcasts from Number 10. There are at least 50,000 deaf children in the UK, and there has been tremendous progress in promoting and facilitating the use of British Sign Language in schools. Many schools teach British Sign Language in their curriculums, and I welcome the Department of Education's work to introduce a GCSE, I was going to say O-level then, sorry, GCSE in British Sign Language as soon as possible. I know that the Government is aiming to consult publicly on the draft content of the qualifications this year, and I encourage people in my constituency in Stourbridge to take part. Now, beyond early education, there has been substantial progress in supporting adult learners after leaving school. The adult education budget and the Advanced Learner Loan provides funding for people aged 19 and over to obtain British Sign Language qualifications. With government funding, the National Deaf Children's Society has developed the Sign Language programme for families to learn British Sign Language. This is an incredible free resource, and I urge people to take full advantage of it. And I noticed that some of the honourable members here in the House today have actually probably been using that service to learn how to do some of their signing. And I think all of us are very keen to follow up on that and do more, so we actually can go out to our constituents and actually use British Sign Language. It's so important. Now, I welcome the Government's commitment to review the Access to Work scheme. It is vital that deaf people receive equal education and employment opportunities, which is why this review will ensure that government-funded workplace adjustments enable British Sign Language users to receive the support they need. I think the honourable friend for Haywood and Middleton mentioned about being, potentially isolated and feeling a minority, and so a minority in some cases, which is why this is so important for those going into the work situation, that they have the ability to feel confident that it's an inclusive environment, which is what you were alluding to. We need that inclusivity. Now, in terms of government policy, we are actually making progress. I think I've mentioned before about the signposting when we're doing the COVID announcements on television and move forward for the announcements from Downing Street. But the provision for accessing services by users of BSL is covered by equalities legislation and the public sector equality duty. Employers, service providers and public bodies must provide services in BSL when it is reasonable to do so. And the Cabinet, we have mentioned the Cabinet Office, but also organisations such as the Equality and Human Rights Commission have suggested we should go further, such as including a live BSL interpreter on set. Schools can choose to offer sign language in their curriculum, as I mentioned before, and include it as part of their extracurriculum activities programme. I will be going around my schools and having those conversations to ensure that actually does take place. So BSL forms part of the local flexibility offer, non-statutory, and qualifications are either fully funded if the learner is unemployed or participating in the low-wage trial, or co-funded depending on the age, prior achievement and employment status of the learner. BSL qualifications at level 3 and above can be funded through an advanced learner loan, which is brilliant to hear.
and the Government has funded the development of Family Sign Language programme. And I'm told on here it is freely available at the National Deaf Children's Society Family Sign Language website for those who are actually listening. Now, there have also been recent parliamentary initiatives. There have been the Deaf Awareness Week in 2021, and an EDM was actually called for the Government to bring forward the legislation giving legal status to the British Sign Language, and that received about 50 signatures. So there's a growing momentum behind this, which is actually going to conclude today, I very, very much hope. And of course, teaching of British Sign Language in schools was tabled in September 2020, and that has actually had significant ground on that, as I've before mentioned. Now, there have been many people supporting this bill: the British Deaf Association, the Royal Institute for Deaf People, and of course Rose Ayling-Ellis, the winner of Strictly Come Dancing. And I think the comment that she made is BSL is not an official language legal in this country, which is outrageous because it is a beautiful, rich language which in its own structure, its own grammar, its own slang, it's even got its own accents. I feel it's important to recognise the role that charities have played in supporting the deaf community. In Stourbridge, DeafScope is a fantastic local organisation that provides a directory of deaf-friendly and deaf-owned businesses, which is brilliant, improving accessibility for deaf people and giving deaf-friendly and deaf-owned businesses a platform to promote their services. This is a local success story, which was created by a deaf couple Carrie and Ishtiaq Hussain, shaped by their own personal experiences of isolation and loneliness growing up deaf. This innovative company has had a tremendous impact on the deaf community by helping to combat feelings of exclusion by connecting deaf people to inclusive opportunities. I know that this bill will be welcomed by DeafScope, as it has been by other deaf-led organisations. Significant progress in promoting and facilitating the use of British Sign Language has been made in recent years, spurred on by brilliant grassroots organisations like DeafScope. But however, there is still much more we are going to do, and today this bill is a big step forward to be able to do that. This bill builds on that and will ensure that British Sign Language and its users finally have legal parity. And my honourable friend for West Lancashire, I thank you so much for bringing this to the House, as I know that everybody else do here, and the Minister for supporting. And I think, as my honourable friend for Innismon said, that it's so important, and my friend from Nottingham South, is it on? Yes? About the inclusivity and accessibility of this society. And that, for me, is so important. And it's one of my, I think in my maiden speech, it's something I very, very much talked about. And it's something I very much want to work on. And if there's anything I can do to support moving and going forward with BSL being more inclusive, I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah.
Derek Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. So debates in this place can often be fairly depressing in a sense. I mean, here or disappointing, I should say. I mean, on Wednesday, the Mr. Speaker had to reprimand the House on the bellowing that went on at PMQs. I've no idea how the BSL interpreter is supposed to cope with that. But sometimes it's very, very different. And on two other occasions this week, I've had cause to think what an amazing privilege it is to listen to debates. I mean, this can be very different. I mean, who knew that we hear all sorts of things about each other? Who knew that the chair of the Treasury Select Committee is a blue badge guide? Or that my friend from Hayward and Middleton speaks Farsi and Maori. But it can also be very serious and moving. And I just want to quickly mention yesterday's debate, about which I sat through on Holocaust Memorial Day. Some incredibly powerful and very personal speeches, particularly struck by the member for Leeds North West, talking about his family and the effect of the Holocaust there. So sometimes we are human. And we behave ourselves and speak very, very powerfully and well. And today we've really seen that, and I pay tribute, as everybody has, to the honourable member for West Lancashire. She is a tribute to her parents, as everybody has said, and this bill is a great tribute to her and to her life's work. And I really, really congratulate her on it. And the line I took from her speech that struck me most powerfully was her point that we should never write people off. That is this essence of a just society, that we do not write people off. And the value of full participation strikes me as twofold. First, it is for the rights, particularly in this case of deaf people. It is absolutely right that we make all efforts to ensure that deaf people can participate fully in all the activities of society, whether that's leisure activities but also education, as we've been hearing about, opportunities for work, and it's been powerfully made the point about access to healthcare and to advice and the role of communication in that. But also the benefit to society. And the story that she told of her father and his work as a plasterer, not a joiner, struck me very powerfully about the enormous benefit that we can bring if we properly include all of our citizens. So it's been fascinating to hear about BSL today and to read about it. I did not know about how old it is. It's been developing for centuries, and the enormous range that the language has. I mean, rather like English itself, huge flexibility and range that it has. And as my friend from Stourbridge just said, the beauty that the language has. We can all see that in when we see people signing. Nor was I aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are different accents in BSL, and I wonder whether the honourable member would like to intervene on me and demonstrate Merseyside signing. I don't know whether Scouser signing is a thing, but I'd be very interested to see it. And failing that, I know that the Minister has learnt BSL herself, and I look forward to her wind-up in thick Norfolk BSL. But anyway, I congratulate them both on the bill, and I don't know if she'd like to intervene before I sit down.
I think everybody will be so amazed at how many dialects there are and how a single word can be so different just across this small country. And let me tell you, as I grew up, I learnt sign language, my first language, but in my dad's later years, every time I said something, he'd go, change now, it's different. This is what it is. So I get to this old age, and I know even I'm not expert at it yet.
She lost her accent when she came to London, but anyway, my very sincere congratulations to her and to the Minister, and I'm delighted to support the bill.
Marson.
Oh, I should say thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would obviously like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for West Lancashire. We speak a lot in this chamber in conventional ways according to protocol, but I would like to say, to show her it goes above protocol and convention. Thank you, and I hope this is right. I'm very proud to be part of this debate and to be in the chamber for this. On a Friday, it often seems it becomes about protocol and procedure, but actually I think this transcends that kind of debate because we are in agreement, we are united, and I think it's one of those moments where we can be proud to try to be doing something that we came into this House to do, which is to make people's lives better than they already are, and I'm very proud to be part of that. And I also pay tribute to the Minister, who in conjunction with when two powerful, formidable women get together, I think that we can relish the results of that. So it's a pleasure to be a small part of that. And I think the Honourable Lady from West Lancashire summed it up when she called this a momentous moment. I think it is momentous, but I also think it's timely. As many of the members who have already spoken, we've spoken about Rose Ayling-Ellis, we've spoken about the issues of communication during a pandemic, where you've seen literally people who've been disadvantaged by the means of communication not being able to fully participate in that. And actually, I was actually very pleased that my colleague mentioned Vision On, because that takes me back as well. I go back a little bit further to that. And I'd also mention trailblazers like Evelyn Glennie, actually, who for many years as a percussionist has shown what deaf and partially hearing people can do when they are allowed and have the ability to play a full role in society in all its glory. So, and Helen Keller, I learnt about Helen Keller when I was at school, who was also blind and deaf, and who was actually a huge champion of disabled people and of women and of workers' rights. So given the chance, and obviously it's a truism that deaf people can play as much of a powerful part of society as anyone else can when they're given the opportunity. And like many people, I've learnt a lot through this process of preparing for this debate, listening to this debate. I had no idea how old British Sign Language is. But actually, if you think about it, you start to unpack it when you think about it. The desire to communicate is just the most basic human need, actually. We're no more or no less a member of the animal kingdom, and animals communicate in many, many non-verbal ways. We communicate in many, many non-verbal ways. By the way, our facial gestures are, I'm very gesticular when I speak anyway, so we already do. And so to recognise British Sign Language as a valid way of communication, which it has been already to some extent in 2003, but this takes it that further step, is a very welcome and logical step, actually, and it shouldn't surprise anyone. This should be a part of a progression. And actually, we should acknowledge, I think, actually more people will use this than use the languages which are already legally recognised, like Welsh, Scots, Gaelic, Cornish, and other languages which make up the rich fabric of communications in this country. And they are all very valuable, and it's just an absolute pleasure that we've got another beautiful language to add to that cornucopia of means of communication. But of course it is about inclusivity. And I think it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, we were in this chamber again. We were debating and seeing through a bill which would enable disabled people to use taxi and cab services. So I think step by step we are making the right choices, we're making the right legislation, we're going in the right direction, although of course we can always do more, we can always go quicker, but it's the right direction, it's the right kind of thing we want to see. Yes, I'd be pleased to.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And does she agree with me that actually when we provide access for disabled people, very often we improve public services for absolutely everyone? I think of the example of providing audio-visual announcements on buses, which are really helpful to disabled people, but actually make it easier for everyone to use them. And that's a really good reason for improving inclusivity, isn't it?
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and actually she preempts just something I was going to try and reflect on, actually, because I completely agree with her. It's not just, we shouldn't silo people so that we're doing something for that person, that group of people. It enriches and it helps all of us when we do this kind of thing. And actually I was reflecting on people there are 12 million people, I think, in this country who are hard of hearing in some way. They might not call themselves disabled. My father's very hard of hearing. He used subtitles, hearing aids, can't go into restaurants because he just can't distinguish language and conversation. And it just strikes me that just by bringing British Sign Language more into the mainstream, recognising it legally, I think it promotes it, I think it gives it more prominence, and perhaps some of those 12 million people also who are affected by some kind of hearing loss might find, well, here's another option. I can communicate in a different way. Just as I travel abroad, I might try and order something in Spain in a different language. Maybe I can try to progress my communication skills in a different way, and so that its reach and its impact can actually be much further than even we in this chamber today envisage it might be. So I'm absolutely proud, as I say, to support this bill, and thank you again to the member for West Lancashire for bringing it. Thank you.
Well.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable member for her speech there, but in particular to the honourable member from West Lancashire. I sat throughout your speech really, really moved. It's, I think, the most moving speech I've heard since I came to this place. Incredibly powerful. And bringing your background with your parents, the pride of your parents, and also your parents absolutely have a right to be proud of you. And I thought, while you're making that speech, this is what politics is about. It's actually you're bringing your experience that you had from your life, coming here and changing. Sorry, the right honourable member. Sorry, it's a very personal thing. It's difficult not to say that. the honourable member comes here bringing her experience from her life and her background and her childhood and turning it into legislation to help people and, as she said, to pay forwards the benefit she had in her upbringing to help other people in the community. And I'm very struck by many of the examples you gave in terms of the way your parents dealt with things, the fact that, sorry, the honourable member, it's the first language that she brought, but in particular the mention that that she had to be the interpreter for her parents in dealing with the health services in particular, but also the anecdote of being a student studying exams and having to rush out between exams to be an interpreter for her mother. And that's, she said, that isn't the right thing. It isn't right that that has to happen, and I fully agree with it. And I, again, agree with my colleagues here, several of them, who said that actually one of the great things about this debate is that it is cross-party, it is consensual. It's a very positive thing in the sense we can actually make a real difference here to a wide number of different people, and this is what the House of Commons should be about. And the debates, as the Honourable Member for Devizes said, debates like the one we had on Wednesday at PMQs, where everyone's baying at each other, is a bit depressing, and these sort of debates are the diametric opposite of that. It wasn't until I became an MP that I realised quite how widely used British Sign Language is. I saw two of my councillors, neither of them deaf or hard of hearing, speaking to each other in BSL, and I was slightly surprised. And one of them, like yourself, grew up with parents who were deaf. The other one worked with deaf people, and actually they used it to communicate very comfortably with each other. And as we've heard, there are 1.2 million people in the UK who have got quite strong hearing loss over 65 decibels, 50,000 deaf children, but 87,000 deaf people have British Sign Language as their preferred language, and 151,000 can use it overall, and I think that's not including the various interpreters and so on. 151,000 deaf people. British Sign Language, as we've heard, and I've really appreciated the contributions today, just that it really is a full language, and not just that it's something you can communicate with, but actually, as you had discussions earlier, it has different accents, it has humour, it has gestures, it has all the richness of any other language. And I think it was obviously recognised in 2003 officially, but it really, there is absolutely no debate that it is rich and as strong as any of the other languages that are officially recognised. And clearly public awareness of it has been growing a lot in recent years and decades, not least by Rose Ayling-Ellis at Strictly Come Dancing, but it's also been far more widely used. We've mentioned about PMQs, the whole COVID briefings that we've had from Number 10 have had British Sign Language interpretations, and all that's good. And the Honourable Member for West Lancashire pointed out how far we have come, that's the positive side of putting it, in recent years. But clearly we need to go an awful lot further, and clearly it does need recognition as an official language. And like as many other people have mentioned here, I'm also surprised that it's taken quite so long to come to this. So I'm very much welcome the fact that government is behind this and supports it. I very much welcome the fact that the Department for Education is looking at GCSE in BSL. I think that's it. Certainly, maybe I'll be tempted to learn that myself. Certainly would have at the time. It's obviously very important that we make sure that legally recognising BSL, making it a full official legally recognised official language, isn't the end of the matter. That we obviously need the council that's in the bill as well to help drive it forwards. We need to make sure that all the public services and as wider services as possible give full access to BSL interpretation, so that the Honourable Member for West Lancashire's or people in her position in future don't have the frustrations that we have, and to make sure that people who are hard of hearing, who are deaf, who use BSL have full access to all services, can have a fully lead a completely full life in terms of employment, and don't have any of the barriers that have currently existed. And I think this piece of legislation will be a very, very big step forwards towards that, to that sort of full equality and full inclusivity of deaf people within the rest of society. It's been an absolutely fantastic debate, very positive, very powerful speeches. I've certainly learnt a lot, and one of the things I have learnt today is to say thank you.
Claire Coutinho.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's always a pleasure to follow my honourable friend from South Cambridgeshire. I would also like to start by congratulating the Honourable Lady for West Lancashire. I think we all feel that the speeches that people make here when they bring their own personal story are so powerful, and I think it really has illuminated some of the challenges that are faced by the deaf community in a way that maybe none of the rest of us who've personally experienced those challenges could do. So I really thank the Honourable Lady for that, and also bringing forward this important bill. I'd also like to thank the Minister. As someone who has worked in government in the past, I know that the ambition of doing good things often meets the challenge of the immovable force of the machine, and I can not only imagine the amount of times the practicalities and the difficulties and the cost implementations have been put to her. So I really welcome both the Minister and the Honourable Member for West Lancashire for pushing through and coming to such a quick resolution to getting the bill to this stage. I am very privileged to have been offered to learn BSL when I was at school. I'm afraid to admit and slightly embarrassed that at the moment my ability is only able to sing a rainbow, but I think the thing that it really did offer me was a window into the life of the deaf community and some of the challenges they face, but also the huge talents that they have to offer this country. We've heard about the 90,000 people who are primary BSL users in this country, and the 150k people who use them use the language, as well as a lot of people who have hearing loss as well. I'm not sure if there is an MP who's done a speech in full in BSL in this place, but I do think this is a brilliant moment for all of us to share some of the stories of our constituents who might otherwise not be able to be heard in this place. So I would like to raise my constituent Janet from Caterham, who recently moved to East Surrey from Nottingham to be closer to her children. Since relocating, she struggled to find a job. She's told me she would much rather not be supported by benefits, but has found it particularly challenging to find a job due to her communication needs as a deaf BSL user. I therefore very much welcome that this bill will help support people placing a duty to review the Access to Work scheme to ensure users of BSL receive the support they need. And I think, listening to the Honourable Lady for West Lancashire's story of her own father and that experience of being locked out of a workplace when they have so much to offer really resonated with me, and obviously with Janet as well. I also had a constituent, Robin from Oxford, who asked me to support this bill today, and she told me about her experience of supporting deaf students in school and how they came on leaps and bounds when the right support was given. And in researching this bill, I heard of instances where people couldn't take their preferred exams because the facilities weren't there. And I thought, how opposite to our ambitions for the education system to not allow people to learn those things that they want to learn. So I also support the fact that this bill will place a duty to examine how we increase the number of BSL interpreters and increase access to BSL interpretation across all of our public services. I very much welcome the thrust of this bill, which is going to increase the promotion, the protection and the facilitation of BSL in this country. Some might argue why we need to have this step, because obviously there is legislation around BSL which came in a couple of decades ago. But whilst it's currently rightly a requirement for institutions to promote BSL where it's reasonable, I think what this bill particularly does is it turns the access from a reactive situation within government and across government departments to a proactive one, which is so important. I also think it's really important that we think about each individual's right to have access to essential information across different areas of public services, from employment to education to health. I spoke about the young person not being able to take their preferred GCSEs, but I've also heard instances, and we've heard in this House, I think, very moving stories of people not being able to interpret health advice, whether that was during the pandemic or whether that was during a medical interview for someone with a very close family connection to them and having to interpret those medical results for them. And as someone who comes from a family of doctors, I know how unintelligible medical results can be. So having to explain that to a family member when the diagnosis is very difficult, I can't imagine how difficult that is. And I don't think that's something that anyone should have to do. And if you have a booked appointment, I think we should be able to provide, particularly in those very difficult instances, support. I also was very touched and moved by the Honourable Lady's mention of her father being written off. When he clearly was an exceptionally talented man, I think this idea of being able to watch someone plastering and then understand how to do it is very alien to me, and not something I would be able to achieve, so I can only imagine the depths of his talents. And we, as a country, should not want to write anyone off. I'm personally very passionate about creating a second chance society, but I think what this bill and some of these contributions today have shown us is that some people don't get a first chance in society today. And we know now that this country is in a very challenging time. There is so much that we have to rebuild post the pandemic. I don't think we can afford to gloss over the talents of any of our people. We will need everyone to be able to achieve all that they want to if we're going to get ourselves back on our feet. And then the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention was that I was very supportive that BSL be added to the 6 Indigenous UK languages. Now, the history and culture of BSL is so important to recognise. It's been around for hundreds of years, and I thought... Yes.
Well, we're going to give way.
She's given a very powerful speech, and I think what's coming out from today is that British Sign Language has the richness of any other language, and we're all actually passionate in trying to understand it and actually learn it ourselves.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. I agree that's one of the things that's been so joyous about today's debate, and also to hear about the different grammars and accents and slangs and the richness of the language, which I'm glad is now going to be added to our list of Indigenous languages. So, on that note, I just would conclude my remarks and say I do agree with everyone today who said it's so important that the deaf community can be listened to and understood. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady from West Lancashire and say that I'm sure that her work today will have provided a rainbow to the deaf community.
SNP spokesperson Marion Fellow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for West Lancashire for her tenacity and organisation in getting this bill to where it sits today. And I'm delighted to support this bill to give BSL the legal status and public awareness it needs to ensure deaf people have full and equal access to education, employment, public services like the NHS, information, legal processes, and to play a greater role in their communities more widely. And in particular, I'm so very happy to see this bill receive government support, as the Minister informed us all yesterday. Since 2003, disabled people's organisations and disability charities haven't stopped campaigning for its legal status. And I'd like to thank those activists and organisations who have continued to fight to make this happen. Organisations like the British Deaf Association, RNID and the Royal Association for Deaf People, to name a few. In my own constituency of Motherwell and Wishaw, I know the local Lanarkshire Deaf Club have also been vocal in calling for a BSL bill to raise and protect the status of the language in Scotland and in the UK. And speaking of Scotland, we have used our devolved powers, as has been already mentioned, to promote the use of BSL in Scotland and engage with the deaf community to develop the first British Sign Language national strategy, which I commend to the Minister. I'm sure she's aware of it, but often we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and I'm sure she'll take lots of good points from that and bring it forward. I mean, as also, as part of the national strategy, the Scottish Government set up the BSL National Advisory Group to represent the views of BSL, and I'm delighted about the British Sign Language Council. And everything works better if lived experience is used at its foundation. However, UK-wide legislation is needed to ensure British Sign Language gets legal protection as a language in its own right, and I'm really happy this is now happening. British Sign Language is an Indigenous language of Scotland and the UK, and as such deserves to finally have the legal recognition accorded to Gaelic and Welsh. This bill provides a great opportunity to break down barriers and begin to create a more inclusive, equal and fair society for deaf people across the 4 nations, and for signers to be prominent in the public arena, as they are in Scotland. It's almost impossible. Even my party's annual conference is signed front and centre. And I think it's really useful and really good. We need to bring in more inclusion right across the public sector, and I'm really pleased that this bill will do it. And congratulations once again to the member for West Lancashire.
Minister Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How wonderful. How wonderful, in fact, that you are in the chair, as you do, representing Doncaster School for the Deaf, one of the oldest deaf schools in the country since 1829. How wonderful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be here speaking on this bill on behalf of the opposition with my friend, the member for West Lancashire. As she said, she is not famed for her patience. She is, however, famed for her determination. And how wonderful to have been one of those Merseyside kids who learnt to fingerspell, as I did in the early 90s, and never realised until today I had her to thank for it. The stories my friend tells of her mum and dad echo across this country, in which working class talent has too often been written off because of a loss, not on their part, but as part of a structural flaw in our society. And every step, like today, on the journey towards equality offers us all a better hope of using all our talents, not just for individual gain, Madam Deputy Speaker, but in service of our wonderful country. So I want today to pay tribute, as so many members right across the House have done, to all of those who've campaigned long and hard for a British Sign Language bill which will provide the legal recognition that the language deserves. To all of those who have led campaigns up and down the country, right across the United Kingdom, I would say that their potential success that we begin today is a credit to their work, and I know that all members in this House join me in that thanks and celebration. At the last 2 general elections, the Labour Party manifesto committed to legislating for a BSL Act and to giving that legal recognition that the language deserves. And we are very pleased that the government are backing this bill today. All too often, as we have heard, deaf people and BSL users are not provided with the support that they need. And throughout society, we impose far too many barriers on the use of British Sign Language, which need not be there. And because of that, the deaf community live with worse outcomes and life chances that could be so much better. Whether it's the failure to provide the correct support in schools, which harms children's outcomes, or whether it's the inability of NHS services to provide qualified and registered BSL interpreters at appointments, which means, as we've heard so often, that people are put in situations that they do not want to be in, where family and friends have to act as an interpreter, which is just not appropriate, or whether people leave appointments just unclear about diagnosis or how they should be taking their medication. These clear examples, Madam Deputy Speaker, demonstrate why this bill matters. Legal recognition can be a powerful moment to raise the status of British Sign Language across the UK. But this bill can do much more than that, and we on these opposition benches fully support the mechanisms contained within the bill to publish guidance to government departments and public bodies and give them clear, objective standards. Now, I'm not going to say much more, Madam Deputy Speaker, except to agree with the many and good contributions that have been made. It would be great if the Minister can say a little bit about how the government will implement the bill, and I know that many in the deaf community will want to hear her say how she is going to continue her work with them to make this the beginning of a journey that will fundamentally change our country. This bill commits the government departments to review their implementation of the guidance as set out in the bill, and it would be great if the Minister can also confirm some details about publishing that so that we can see the path ahead, and also, as has been mentioned, how it will interact with the National Disability Strategy. We also want to see this bill progress swiftly through committee and make progress in Parliament without delay. And the Secretary of State is nodding, and I thank her for it. And people outside this House will see the joint determination that we have on this issue. I want to conclude by paying tribute to my friends, the members for Nottingham South and West Ham, who also made excellent contributions on our side, and to all of those members in this House who I think have joined together today to send a message about the change we want to see. Finally, I want to say how proud we are of the deaf community for winning this fight and for the journey that our country will go on. And lastly, to my friend, the member for West Lancashire, Merseyside today is very proud of her. Atheist though I am, I cannot comment on the Almighty. But I can say that I know that all kinds of Scousers, plastic and otherwise, are very proud of her. That's people from Birkenhead. Are exceedingly proud of her, and I know that if her mum and dad were in the public gallery right now looking down on her, they simply could not be more proud. Let her example spur on every single campaigner for equality in our country. Madam Deputy Speaker, sometimes progress happens. This is what it looks like.
Minister Chloe Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I join many others in this chamber in what they've done in saying thank you to the Honourable Member for West Lancashire and to congratulate her in all the work she has done to bring forward this bill and working with me to do so. I see loud and clear her commitment and dedication in championing British Sign Language for reasons that she has set out so eloquently, and I am humbled to join her in doing that. Both of us indeed have personal experiences in our families of deafness, and we share that passion for change. So we hope that through this bill we will see an increase in the use of British Sign Language by everybody in society and a better deal, Madam Deputy Speaker, for deaf people. So this bill will recognise British Sign Language as a language in its own right and place a duty on the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to issue guidance on the promotion and facilitation of BSL. It will also require DWP to report on information supplied by ministerial departments regarding their use of BSL. As is now widely known, I'm pleased to confirm that the bill has the full support of the government. And indeed, it does have that because, amongst other very many good reasons which I'll come on to, we also share a set of goals and a set of ambitions here that is reflected in our National Disability Strategy, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we all here today, I'm sure, want to be able to make change such as that. I'm also pleased, Madam Deputy Speaker, that today's proceedings here in this place are available with British Sign Language interpretation. I think that's only right, and I hope that more can be done here as a beacon through Parliament. As a government, then, we are committed to supporting all people with a disability, including deaf people, to lead fulfilled and independent lives. And for deaf people, this must include the ability to communicate with others through BSL or other forms of deaf communication. So across the UK, as many as 150,000 people use some form of BSL every day, according to the British Deaf Association. That is thousands of our fellow citizens. And for many it is, as has been explained, their first language and main form of communication. But ignorance and indifference remain, and that is what we want to try to tackle. Of course, the language of BSL, the vocabulary and syntax of BSL don't replicate spoken English, and many deaf citizens have a lower reading comprehension age than the general population, and too many deaf people in the UK still face social exclusion as a direct result of linguistic exclusion, affecting employment, education and access to healthcare. And I'm pleased to hear members around the chamber today make points on all of those very valuable aspects. So this government already recognises the importance of deaf people being supported and enabled to communicate through BSL where they wish to do so. Indeed, as has already been noted, and I'm glad that the Honourable Member for Garston is here today to have said so herself, it was recognised in a ministerial statement in 2003. In addition to that, the Equality Act already means that employers, service providers and public bodies should provide services in BSL when it is requested and reasonable to do so. We're not intending to make any changes to the Equality Act, so that supporting architecture remains in place. However, individual BSL users can often find themselves not receiving the interpretation that they need. And the Honourable Lady and campaigners are clear that more recognition and guidance is needed, and I agree. I too am very, very grateful to all who have campaigned for this and for sharing the challenges that BSL users face. I'm really pleased that we have been able to work together to give recognition and to make real improvements to the communication options for deaf people. I'd also like briefly to thank my officials who have been working very hard to bring this about, and also the Honourable Member for Orpington for his support in forging cross-party consensus for an important goal here today. Many honourable members I know have come here today, especially, Madam Deputy Speaker, to help their deaf constituents' voices be heard, and I think that is magnificent. So through this bill, then, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions will regularly report on what each relevant government department, those detailed in the schedule of the bill, have done to promote or facilitate the use of BSL in their communications with the public. Part 2 sets that out in more detail. These could include public announcements, publication of any plan, strategy or consultation document, or any activities promoting the work of that department, for example, press conferences. This reporting then will give us a much better understanding of how BSL is being used across the government and how we can continue to improve communication for BSL users. The Secretary of State will also be required to produce guidance about the promotion and facilitation of the use of BSL, and this is set out in Part 3 of the bill. Guidance may include advice on reporting requirements, but also on best practice for BSL communications and even case studies setting out the value of BSL provision. Now, I note the contributions here today of honourable members from Wales, notably the Vale of Clwyd and Ynys Mon. And I'd like to just make clear here that we absolutely share their intention to support deaf and disabled people across the entirety of the UK, including in their constituencies. So we are working behind the scenes to establish that in this bill, the appropriate way in regard to the devolution settlements. And I would refer honourable members to the territorial extent that is set out in the explanatory notes. Can I also acknowledge the contribution of the honourable member for Motherwell and Wishaw and welcome her support here today too. So leading up to this debate then, my department and other government departments have held a number of stakeholder forums to ensure that we understand the views and perspectives of disabled people. This will continue as this bill passes through Parliament. We're going further as well. I'm going to create a non-statutory board of British Sign Language users which can advise the government on matters pertaining to BSL, and I'll be able to let the House know more about all of these aspects as time goes on, of course. To complement the approach set out in the bill, we're also developing a suite of non-statutory measures which will again help promote and facilitate the use of BSL. This includes examining how we might increase the number of BSL interpreters, reviewing how we might work in DWP to ensure that the Access to Work Fund helps BSL users, and aiming to update the National Disability Strategy to facilitate and promote BSL usage. I'll acknowledge here also the wider work that's going on across government to benefit users of BSL, which includes the expansion of jury service that has already been mentioned here this morning, and I pay tribute to my right honourable friend from Swindon who noted that. And also, as has been mentioned several times, the development of a British Sign Language GCSE, which I'm very much looking forward to. Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to end on a personal note, actually, as others have also today. This is, as many honourable members have said, this is, of course, a sort of a national moment, because we've seen in popular culture through the autumn the inspirational success of Rose Ayling-Ellis on Strictly Come Dancing. From that, we see that interest in BSL is on the rise. This bill is an important next step. We want to seize that moment to help improve the lives of deaf people and those closest to them. It's a crucial step, and it's going to make a tangible difference in deaf people's everyday lives, including by listening to deaf people about how that should be done. Now, Rose and that journey to glitterball glory have played a huge part in doing that. But for many of us, of course, we are also here with personal stories in our back pocket as well. And I'm incredibly proud to support this bill today. It's very meaningful to me because I've got a family member probably at home right now watching with the subtitles, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker. And that's somebody who crashed out of the work that they love because of increasing hearing loss. And that's an example to me of somebody who spurs me on in the kind of work we can do here in Parliament when we work together, when we find the important things where the might and power of government may be able to come together with personal stories, and we can create that change. It's a privileged opportunity that we have for public service, and I'm proud to commend this bill to the House.
Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't it fantastic that this chamber has spoken with one voice today? Absolutely brilliant. I have enjoyed working with the Minister and her team, and working together across this House. Look what a difference we've made. We've made a difference. We will make a difference. So, on behalf of the deaf community, I'd like to thank each and every member for the support they've given this bill. My dad would have loved to have been here today, as would all those campaigners who've gone before and upon whose shoulders we stand on this very momentous day. So, thank you all.